Welcome to today's video. Gonna be reacted to a video made by Bit Gaming. It's all Plants vs Zombies unused content. Let's bits. Okay.
Alright, so before we get to talking about the final launch release of the game, let's first take things way back and go over numerous changes to the game from its earlier pre-release builds. Now, probably the biggest change of them all is with the title of the game itself. Now, I won't go over the entire development history of this game, but since the initial start of the game's development in 2002, there were a whole bunch of names that were tossed around before finally going with Plants vs. Zombies. These include Bloom and Doom, Zombotany, Lawn of the Dead, which I assume may have tiptoed a bit too close to the Dawn variety, and many, many more, as are seen on this slide. From some pretty good ones like Rest in Peas, to some questionable ones too. Also, being frustrated that he couldn't use the Lawn of the Dead name, developer George Fan made graphics for 3 more titles: Zombies and Grass, Insane Iscarium, which was a play on another game developed by George Fan, Insane Aquarium, as well as Get Your Fill of Chlorophyll. Anyways, after juggling with a few of the names, ultimately around 2009, it seems the Plants vs. Zombies name was finally decided on.
Okay.
Interestingly enough though, some of the names like Zombotany and Bloom and Doom still did make their way into the final game, albeit in a smaller role. And in addition to sharing the early title graphics, George Fan also shared a whole bunch of early graphics for the game, including this early design of the pea shooter where it actually was shaped.
Wait, why does it look like an alien? Why does it look like that would be on the zombie's eyes? And the zombies. It's basically gonna be an alien.
Like a pea pod. For the most part, these other early designs look pretty similar to their final counterparts, with notable exceptions to this being the Hypno Shroom looking less funky, and the cactus was initially not a cactus at all, but rather what looks like a bee stinger instead. And he also showed off a bunch of early graphics for the zombie side of things too. Not only did the base zombie graphic get redone, but originally, for simplicity, the zombies just had a medieval helmet in silver, gold, and black to signify different levels of defense, a shield instead of the door, as well as a propeller cap thing instead of the balloon that's used for the balloon zombie in the final. I guess the zombies still did keep a propeller cap, albeit smaller, in the final design as a nod to this original one. Then, in addition to all of this, there are numerous screenshots of the game throughout its development. Firstly, there's this earliest known screenshot of the game where it looks very different, with a bunch of placeholder graphics, as well as what looks to be a real-life picture of, I suppose, some soil as the background. The zombies look way more ghoulish, and it looks like in this earlier build, the player would have had to water the plants instead of collecting sunshine, as you do in the final. Then in later screenshots, we can see the game progress more and more to the final product, but along the way, there are still a bunch of things to note, like this placeholder maple leaf background here, an early placeholder version of the magnet shroom seen here, different UI graphics and placement, like having the sunshine counter in the top right here, and more. Now, the last thing from the pre-release builds I want to touch on, at least for this video, are several plants as well as zombies that were planned to be included but were ultimately removed from the game before the final release. In addition to the propeller zombie that became the balloon zombie I mentioned earlier, there's also this early version of the balloon zombie where it's seen firmly grasping onto the balloon instead of having it tied around its stomach. Then next up we have a dog walker zombie. Apparently, although the zombie itself still had the same 10 hit point amount of health as a regular zombie, after being defeated, the dog will then charge alone. This dog would have had 14 HP and apparently, due to its low-to-the-ground nature, wouldn't be able to be hit by most of the plants in the game. I guess this mechanic is kind of similar to the newspaper zombie that charges at you faster after its newspaper gets destroyed. Then on the plant side of things, first is this time stopper apple. Similar to the ice room, this would stop time for up to 3 seconds, but would also speed up the cooldown on any seed packets. Then, as we saw earlier, there's also the stinger plant that could have apparently been placed on top of other plants and would then fire spikes at flying zombies. There's also an unused iceberg lettuce, which, although was later added in Plants vs. Zombies 2, was originally going to function here very differently. Here it was just going to function very similar to the regular cabbage pult, but just like the snow pea, would slow down any zombie hits. I guess this effect might have been replaced by the kernel pult, where its butter projectile has a 25% chance of stunning a zombie. Then lastly, we got Cherry Hover Bomb, which uses early Cherry Bomb graphics and would function pretty much the same, but could be placed on top of another plant. And then there's the Duplicator Cycler plant that, when planted, would have a seed packet on top of it that, as the name implies, would constantly cycle. So I guess this would result in a random plant being cycled in constantly, for better or for worse. Now, there are a whole bunch more pre-release changes, early graphics, concept art, early footage, and even a few working beta builds that have been dumped online. Unfortunately, it's too much to cover in a single video here, but if enough of you enjoyed this video, let me know, and maybe someday I'll make a follow-up and we can take a deeper dive into more of the pre-release stuff. So, on that note, let's now switch gears and start talking about the final release of the game and the many things that are left over unused or that were scrapped. Now, first up, although there are only 5 levels or worlds in the game, there is actually coding for an unused 6th level. There's only remnants of 6-1 left over, and unfortunately it just appears to be a duplicate of 5-9. Now, despite this, the once planned 6th level was apparently intended to be a roof-themed level at night. This theme is seen in the game's final level, 5-10, so I guess the next world was going to build onto this theme even more. There's also reason to believe that the background used for 5-10 was once just going to be for level 6, as the file name for the background graphic is quite explicitly titled Background 6 Boss, while the rest of the level 5 stages use the background graphic titled Background 5. Now, last up for this video, there are a ton of things in this game in the unused graphics department, and first are a few animations that are never seen. First up, for the magnet shroom, there's its idle animation that's seen when it's active, but for when the shroom is inactive instead, which is never normally seen. Then also, once again, for the magnet shroom, there's an unused extended animation for when it activates to steal a metallic object from a zombie. The final version kinda just snaps between states, whereas the unused one has a much smoother transition that I think looks much better. Then similarly, next, there's also an unused extended animation for the Gravebuster chomping away at a gravestone. It's pretty similar, but it appears to have an extra short little bounce halfway through the animation. Then there's this set of unused animations for the squash, transitioning between the looking and idle pose, as well as this unused animation of the sun shroom sleeping while big. In the final game, the sun shroom sleeps in the daytime and won't ever grow to the bigger size, and as such, this never ends up being seen. Okay. And then to wrap things up for the unused animations for transitioning between poses, there are these unused ones for the dancing zombie transitioning from their pointing pose. Wow, that sure looks like a certain 80s pop star, you might be thinking, and yeah, before the Game of the Year update of the game was released in 2010, the main dancing zombie and the backup dancers looked quite different than they do now. Both of these were an obvious reference to the music video of Michael Jackson's Thriller. And in addition to the estate of Michael Jackson apparently objecting to this overt reference in the game, Michael Jackson actually passed away around a month after Plants vs. Zombies originally released. So yeah, I can definitely see how this was not a good time to have this reference in the game anyway. So ultimately, the Thriller costumes were changed to more generic 70s attire, and now the dancing zombies look nothing like Michael Jackson. But the copyright troubles for this game didn't end there either, as the description for the Zomboni zombie was updated in the Game of the Year update as well. I guess someone thought that Zomboni was a bit too close to the trademarked name Zamboni, so after ultimately getting permission, I guess, the developers changed the description of the Zomboni to be very tongue-in-cheek, as it was changed to the following: not to be mistaken for a Zamboni brand ice resurfacing machine. Zamboni and the image of the ice resurfacing machine are registered trademarks of Frank J. Zamboni Incorporated, and Zamboni is used with permission. For all your non-zombie related ice resurfacing needs, visit www.zamboni.com. Honestly, probably the best video game character description I've seen in a long time. And while we're talking about changes between versions, the graphic for the adventure option on the main menu tombstone was changed too, to flip the level counter on the bottom to the top to, I guess, better match the top curve as is seen on the tombstone, and I guess it removed the little gap between this option and the ones below. Now switching away from the unused animations, there's a whack load of more unused static graphics. The first of these are for 2 unused zombie seed packets for the iZombie minigame, where the game gets flipped as you take control of spawning zombies instead of plants. Now these unused graphics are for seed packets of the Zomboni as well as the Pogo Zombie, both of which are normally never placeable in this mode. You can apparently still force the game to re-implement them in this mode, and although they are mostly functional, they still have a few issues, so that might be why they weren't fully added. Then, speaking of the Zomboni again, there's also this early graphic for it where the Z is missing from the Zamboni. Also related to the zombies, we have this unused graphic of a zombie head in a helmet that was apparently meant for the zombie bobsled team, sprites of a helmet as well as it getting damaged, thought to have been meant for the Giga Gargantuars. There's also this unused belt and sprite associated with eye twitching meant for the Jack-in-the-Box zombie. There's an early version of the Zombot's leg, an unused variant of the RV that's thrown at your plants by the Zomboss, and finally there's this early version of the zombie brain flag where the damage holes are different, and there's this unused graphic of the Bungee zombie where it looks like a deer in headlights. Now next up, I went over the adventure mode graphic that was changed on the main menu, but there are also a few other unused graphics for the tombstone that are left over in the game. These were all seen in the pre-release builds I mentioned earlier, but there's an early graphic of the survival button that was originally going to be placed at the top of the tombstone, a graphic for the vase breaker option that I guess was originally going to be on the main menu before being moved to the puzzle menu, and finally, before being renamed to minigames, there's this unused graphic for challenges. And while on the topic of vase breaker, there's also an unused graphic for an also unused vase type, a zombie vase. In the final game, zombies only have a chance of being in the mystery vases, but perhaps this would guarantee them. Next up, there are also a few normally unseen screens left over in the game, the first of which is this shot of Crazy Dave's Twitty Dinkies, where the player has a whole ton of cash, but all the upgrade plants are sold out. Secondly, there's also this screen of the More Ways to Play menu that's seen in other versions of the game. Since the PC version already has most of these options on the main menu and it doesn't have a quick play mode, yeah, there wasn't really a reason to have this screen there, so it's kinda strange that this graphic for it was left over here. I mentioned a bunch of the unused graphics for the zombies earlier, but there are also several for the plants too. We got a slightly alternate version of the pumpkin that also contains a second intermediate stage of degradation that isn't ever seen in the game. And speaking of degradation, there's also this unused sprite for the spikeweed degrading too. In the final game, the spikeweed never degrades, and basically it only goes away if a Zomboni drives onto it, but I guess this shows that it too was going to degrade, maybe after dealing X amount of damage to zombies, or perhaps just over time. Then we got some very small sprites that I'll enlarge here for a face vine meant for the Gravebuster's face, eyelid sprites for the coffee beans, as well as this sprite meant to be eyebrows for the starfruits. And I guess this game really has something against eyebrows, as there's yet another unused eyebrow graphic, this time meant to have been for the imitator. Then we also have an unused alternate design of the Gatling Pea with a different hat and mouth barrels, an unused exhaust pipe section meant for the Cobb cannon, and finally, although seen integrated into the final sprite of the sea shrooms, there's an unused standalone graphic for their eyes. And nope, the unused graphics don't stop there, we got quite a few more to go. Next, there's this unused Plants vs. Zombies game box listed as pvz. Now this is a leftover from the free trial version of the game, as there it's seen in Crazy Dave's store as a way to link the player to a site to purchase the full game. But yeah, in the full game, you already have the full game, so this wasn't necessary. There's an unused early version of the silver coin where it features a brain on it instead of the dollar sign. There's this unused icon for the also unused minigame, Bungee Blitz. And then we also have this early graphic of the daytime lawn, as a few changes are seen from the final version. Now, I mentioned some of the early pre-release graphics for the plants and such earlier, but it turns out a bunch of early crude placeholder graphics were left over in the final release, too. We got crude placeholders for everything, including the wall and tall nuts, a pea shooter's head, lily pad, a very grumpy squash, cabbage pulse cabbage, early graphics for the puff, fume, and doom shrooms, and finally an early placeholder for the cactus where it's seen looking hella cool and with some hair instead of the hat that they do have in the final. And lastly, for the unused graphics, there's also a handful of them from the multiplayer mode that was seen on the console version of Plants vs. Zombies. Since these are left over in the PC Game of the Year version, it's possible that the multiplayer mode may have at least been considered for the PC version as well. And now next, although not unused, there are some graphics that aren't ever seen in full, and as such have sections not normally ever seen by the player. These include the full graphic of the umbrella leaf not being covered by leaves. We can see the cattails and Gatling peas heads without their respective hats. There's some hair actually hidden away under the Zomboni driver's hat. The imitator can also be seen what it looks like without a hat. There's a normally unseen section of Crazy Dave's leg graphic where you can get a glimpse at his belly. The body segment of the Gargantuars appears to show that their head might have been planned to fall off, much like they do with the other zombies in the game, but ultimately the head stays in place in the final version. And lastly, seeing how massive the Zombot is in the final boss fight in the game, it should be no surprise that there are parts of these graphics that are normally hidden off screen too. Alright, so let's start off this video with all the pre-release stuff. And before we even get to some of the beta builds, first, there are several bits of concept art for the game that reveal a lot of zombies, plants, and ideas that never made the cut for the final release. For starters, there are a few concept sketches for potential enemies for the game. In addition to Sylvester, the alien seen in another game made by the developers of Plants vs. Zombies, Insane Aquarium, here there are several other concepts for the enemies. And I guess this was a time before even zombies were chosen as the main antagonists, as here we can see various other things like some grasshoppers, drill bots or something, some kind of flying demon bat thing, a weird multi-eyed crocodile, a bipedal demon, and more. Then for the plant side of things, there too among the concept sketches are various types of plants that never made the cut, at least in this game. These include more vegetables like carrots, an onion, and a radish. Then there's also dandelions, this plant with 4 leaves, as well as whatever this thing is. Then additionally here, we can also see some alternate designs of plants that we did see in the game, like this simplistic flytrap, this jalapeno that has it growing a stem off of the ground, a sad-looking pumpkin fella, as well as this, what I think is the coffee bean, seen here like it's ready for war. And we went over this briefly in my previous video, but this concept art here also shows a few early sketches of the pea shooter back when it looked more like a pea pod. And here it also looks like maybe even each of the individual peas that were shot out were considered to have a face too. Then next we got another really early conceptual sketch here, as it appears to be planning out how the game was going to look and play. Here we too can see some more ideas that were cut from the game, including a 2-player mode where the second player would send aliens down. At least I think that's what it says. Unfortunately, the resolution of these images, as you can see, often aren't ideal. And yeah, I guess the antagonists were planned to be aliens instead of zombies at this point, as even though there's an early design sketch of a zombie-looking fella here, alien types are listed here, and these also contain at least one mechanic that wasn't ever implemented in this game, a fire-type enemy that would have been neutralized with water. There's also a jumping and double jumping enemy listed here, and the jumper might have been turned into the pole vaulting zombie, but I'm not really sure how the double jumping was intended to work. And lastly here, we can see yet another seemingly scrapped plant type in what looks to be a turnip that would apparently generate money for the player. So I guess this was later replaced with the marigold flowers in the game. Another interesting concept art is for the Zombot final boss of the game. This sketch appears to show that initially, instead of just Zomboss controlling the Zombot, the idea was that yet another character would be controlling Zomboss, who would in turn then control the Zombot. Pretty trippy. And lastly, for the concept art, in addition to showing off some earlier concept sketches of many of the game's plants, the game's artist, Rich Werner, had also shared some more conceptual sketches of the game's zombies, including many variants that didn't make it into the game. These include a zombie in a dress, a painter zombie, a zombie in a leather jacket, little boy and girl zombies. There's a zombie in a hoodie, an alternate Jack-in-the-Box zombie, complete with a little monkey zombie too, a thick zombie, a Jimbro zombie that would apparently use a whole flippin' power line pole, presumably as an attack, and there's also a pole-less earlier design for him too. Then there's also art for the unused dog zombie that I covered in my previous video, a zombie with a rolling pin, yet another scrap design for the Jack-in-the-Box zombie, this time a clown, construction worker zombies, and finally an I don't even know how to explain this zombie. Now, I think some of these zombie designs are pretty cool, and even if some of them didn't behave any differently than the standard zombies, the variety in designs would have been really nice to see and would have added some more charm to this game. Then, for zombies that didn't go unused, in these concept sketches we can also see some early designs for the standard brown coat zombie, as well as a Zomboni-less and Took-less Zomboni zombie that normally is never seen in full like this. Next up, although not left over in the game or anything, the composer for Plants vs. Zombies, Laura Shigihara, has posted several early versions of songs heard in the game, as well as one track that was completely scrapped. For the most part, the differences are pretty minimal, ranging from different levels of reverb, to the early versions lacking a proper looping section, causing them to abruptly get cut out. Other more notable changes include the cerebral track being initially a whole octave lower compared to how it's heard in the final. An early version of the Ultimate Battle track has a normally unheard 4-note ending that I guess was cut since the song always loops in the game. And then for the Graze the Roof song, in the early version a piano was used as the main instrument instead of a plucked string instrument as is heard in the final version. The rest of the differences between the tracks are frankly not so interesting in my opinion, so we'll skip over them here. But if you are interested in listening to them all in full, head on over to the cutting room floor, linked down in the description below. And now lastly for the audio stuff, like I mentioned, there's one track that never made it to the final cut of the game. And this is a track simply known as Zombotany, I guess named after one of the many scrapped titles that were tossed around for this game before Plants vs. Zombies was chosen, as discussed in my previous video. Anyways, here's a quick sample of the track. Now apparently, according to Laura Shigihara, this unused track was intended for the final boss fight, but since the more intense sections of the song weren't long enough for the boss battle, the song was outright scrapped in favor of Brainiac Maniac, as is heard in the final release. Now next up, I want to briefly touch on a presentation of the game that was given that showcased several early prototype builds of the game, and of course here there are several changes that can be seen compared to the final version. For starters, a prototype from July 2006 was showcased a whole 3 years before the game was released. This build has an incredibly early title screen, a really basic main menu with a stock photo of a bunch of zombies, as well as the early leaf background graphic plant selection screen that I mentioned in my previous video. Interestingly, this build would have featured a very different mechanic for the plants than how they work in the final game. Instead of just picking a bunch of plants you want and being able to place as many of each with the only constraint being your sun count, you would have instead picked a deck of cards that would be assigned a probability value in order to be drawn in the game. So as shown here, after drawing 3 random cards at the start, the next plant that would show up would be randomly chosen based on the rest of the cards that you chose in your deck. It's a bit confusing, so I'm glad that this was scrapped in favor of being able to just place any plant whenever, as long as you have enough sun. Also, as you probably noticed here, this build of the game still features some early placeholder graphics and doesn't even have the lawnmowers as the last line of defense, but instead just some caution bars. And these were also seen in another early animation posted by the game's developer, George Fan, where there can be seen that as a placeholder, if the zombies reached one of these bars, they would just get blammoed out of existence. Then also in this same presentation, after showing off a whole bunch of other prototype builds that aren't currently publicly available, a build from April 1st, 2008 is shown off back when the game's name was changed to Lawn of the Dead. Here on the main menu, an early graphic for the adventure mode was seen, as well as only 2 other missing options on the tombstone instead of the total of 4 that's seen in future builds. Then when going to the adventure mode in this particular build, it would lead to an otherwise unseen snow level where a bunch of zombies are seen frozen in place in front of a stock image of some frozen tundra. April 1st is, of course, April Fool's Day, so the developers played a little prank with this build, as in this prototype, the zombies don't ever move and no sunlight could ever be collected, leaving you basically stuck on this screen with nothing to do. And now, let's switch gears and finally talk about some of the pre-release builds of Plants vs. Zombies that are actually publicly available, as they've been acquired from 2 former beta testers of the game, and then subsequently dumped online for the world to enjoy. The first of these prototypes is version 0.1.1.1014 that was built in December of 2008, around 5 months prior to the game's final release. Right off the bat, interestingly, despite being so close to the final release date, this build still carries the early Bloom and Doom name, suggesting that the final decision to go with Plants vs. Zombies might have been a pretty last-minute call. Now, there are a whole bunch of changes seen in this early build, from placeholder text for Crazy Dave, to this build lacking several sound effects, to an early animation for the Jack-in-the-Box zombie. There's no opening or ending cinematic implemented here yet. There are some graphical changes, like with the reward animation graphic appearing darker here. The zombies ate your brains graphic seen when failing a level is stylized a bit differently, and Crazy Dave lacks a mallet graphic for the mallet minigame, and here refers to it as a hammer instead. A number of things are different in the menus too. For starters, on the minigames menu, some of the thumbnail graphics are different. A trophy is placed right over the graphic here when completing a puzzle or minigame, instead of the red corner banner that's seen in the final. The walnut bowling and the Gould minigames swapped places. And then on the main menu, the help button leads to a simple placeholder pop-up window telling the player to check back later, as opposed to the full-screen handwritten zombie note. This prototype also has an early credit sequence that's thought to be an early version of the Zombies on Your Lawn music video that's seen in the final game's ending sequence. There are a plethora of more minor changes in each individual level, some text strings, and in the almanacs. So many so that, once again, in the interest of time, I won't go into more detail for them in this video, but again, if you're interested, I'll kindly direct you to the Cutting Room Floor page down below. That said though, there's actually an unused level 6 in this build that can only be accessed via a level select that can be enabled by using some debug functions. This stage obviously wasn't ready for release, as we can see it still utilizes some very early placeholder graphics, but it also appears to show a level design that was scrapped or perhaps reworked into the rooftop mechanic. Now, despite not having a pool here, this level 6 appears to have been meant to take place in the backyard area, and it would have had this elevated 4x5 section in the top right here. And much like the rooftop stages, most plants can't shoot up to this elevated portion, thus requiring one of the catapult plants or a plant placed up there. So yeah, I guess this might have been the original idea for the elevation mechanic that was reworked for the rooftop stages. Now back to some more audio changes. This early build uses at least 2 different sound effects that are notable compared to the final version. The first of these is the sound effect for breaking open a vase in the vase minigame. And then the second difference can be heard with the sound effect for the slot machine minigame, where in this prototype, the quality of the audio file sounds much lower. Then moving on, we have the second and only other currently publicly dumped prototype of Plants vs. Zombies, version 0.9.9.1029. Being so close to version 1.0 and built in February of 2009, only around 3 months before the full release of the game, it shouldn't come as a surprise that this prototype is much closer to the final product. For starters here, this build ditches the Bloom and Doom name for Plants vs. Zombies instead. That said, however, as you can see here, the logo appears quite different than the final design. The font is different, as is the gravestone, and the old logo design had all of this grass and soil under the text, which was almost completely removed in the final design, except for under the tombstone. And unfortunately, that's pretty much where the changes end, as for the most part, almost everything else is basically the same as the final.
Honestly, I just need to see the concept art, because that's the most fun part of the early versions of a game. The concept arts are the most fun.
One last notable difference I want to go over here is that this prototype, a different credits end screen can be seen. There are several question mark names in the QA tester and special thanks sections. Chad here was removed from the QA tester credits, RIP Chad, and I guess this person was upgraded from the special thanks section all the way to studio director, which honestly seems like a pretty big jump. And now, last up for this video, I want to go over a secret menu in the game that goes normally unused, but can actually be re-implemented into the game with some modifications. And yeah, it's not only found in the pre-release builds, but even in the final release too. So hidden in the menu that you normally see when going to survival or puzzles or minigames, there's a page simply listed as Limbo Page. And this Limbo page actually lets you access several hidden features and even some unused minigames, so let's go over them all here. First up, we got the Walnut Art Challenge, and just like the other art challenges in the game, the idea here is to place walnuts on the lawn to make the shape of a bigger nut. Interestingly though, exclusive to the prototype build, this otherwise inaccessible minigame also contains 2 large eye graphics that when completing the challenge would result in the design looking much more akin to the walnut. And despite these graphics being removed from the version found in the final game, I guess their properties weren't fully removed, as you still can't place any plants on the tiles that they would have occupied, and I guess this actually explains a lot. I was super confused why I couldn't plant anything in those spots when I first played this minigame. Then next up on the Limbo page is Sunny Day, and as the name suggests, things are much sunnier. The zombies encroach as normal, but here, larger sun things will fall, giving you 50 instead of the normal 25 you usually get. This certainly makes it easier to set up your army of plants, but I guess it isn't all too interesting of a minigame, which could have been why it wasn't fully implemented. Then next we got Unsodded, which is honestly a pretty neat minigame. Here only the middle 3 rows have tiles that you can place plants on, but unlike the earlier levels in the game's adventure mode, the zombies will actually still walk on the top and bottom paths. So you'll have to use plants and shrooms that fire vertically, at an angle, or the 3 Peters to beat this one. Up next is Big Time, and here, you guessed it, some units are big. Unfortunately, however, although any plants can be selected and used, only the marigolds, sunflowers, and walnuts actually have their size increased here. based on this, I'm guessing the idea to scrap this minigame was made earlier before any more plants had their size increased. It's kind of a cool novelty, but I guess just like the Sunny Day minigame, after playing through it once, it might not have been deemed interesting enough to keep. Next, there's Art Challenge Sunflower, which again is just another art challenge stage, this time with making a sunflower design. And then there's Air Raid, which is a fog level with mostly balloon zombies attacking you. Honestly, I thought this challenge would be pretty easy, but since cacti are so expensive, it was pretty challenging to get set up on this one. Now, interestingly, next up is a minigame listed as Ice Level, and apparently this was meant to be the ice level that was used as the joke for the April Fool's build we went over earlier. Unfortunately, though, due to most of the ice level assets being removed, the end resulting leftover here is just a default daytime stage without any zombies even. And no sun ever drops either, so after you're done planting the one walnut with the default 50 sun you're given, you're pretty much stuck here with nothing else to do. The next option on the menu is Zen Garden, and I assume at some point it was just going to take you to the Zen Garden part of the game, but here it just crashes for me. Then moving on, next is High Gravity, which ramps up the gravity on a rooftop stage, basically making most catapult plants and the starfruit useless, making this quite the challenge. Grave Danger is a pretty normal nighttime map with just some more gravestones in the backyard. Then there's a different Can You Dig It here that's not the same as the one iZombie level. Here the idea is that the player's lawn is covered in walnuts and the player has to use the shovel to strategically dig out some nuts and replace them with pea shooters. Basically, I guess this minigame boils down to balancing how many of these nuts you'd like to keep around for defense and how much room you want to make for offense. Next is Dark Stormy Night, which is basically just a more difficult level 4-10 from Adventure Mode. Then similarly, there's Bungee Blitz, which has this also otherwise unused thumbnail graphic that's just a more difficult version of Adventure Mode's 5-5. Then we got a bunch of Survival Endless levels, which, as their name suggests, are just endless versions of each respective zone in the game, aside from the backyard pool level. These are very similar to the survival levels that are seen in the game, but are of course endless, as opposed to having a limit of flags. Then we got Upsell, which is basically what the developers use to upsell a player who is playing the demo version of this game to purchase the full game after completing level 3-4. Then the Tree of Wisdom option here just takes you to the Tree of Wisdom. Go figure. Now lastly, interestingly, there's one more minigame on this Limbo page that isn't easily accessible in the final game, but is more readily seen in the first prototype build we went over earlier, since in the final version, the intro minigame covers it on this page. And as it suggests, the intro selection here just takes you to the start of the adventure mode as if you were playing it for the first time. But yeah, in the prototype build, the squirrel option is uncovered, so let's check it out. Now this minigame starts off very similar to Can You Dig It, as the screen is filled with walnuts. But this time, instead of digging to plant pea shooters, you dig out the nuts in order to find some hiding squirrels. Unfortunately, these squirrels aren't visible in the final release of the game, even if you do manage to load into this minigame. But they can be seen in the prototype builds, and yeah, these squirrel fellas aren't ever seen anywhere else in Plants vs. Zombies. Sorry, chumbos. Anyways, yeah, those are all of the unused minigames that can be found in this hidden page in the game. They do differ in terms of quality in my opinion, so I think it's no surprise why some of them were cut, but some, like the Endless Wave ones, I think could have been really cool to see. I guess at least they're still found left over for us in the game to enjoy if we really want to. This video will be focusing entirely on a prototype version of Plants vs. Zombies, the version 0.1.1014 build back when it was still called Bluement Doom, and we'll be focusing on a whole metric ton of graphics found within that prototype that either were updated for the final build or just went completely unused and never really saw the light of day. And there's so many of these unused graphics here that, yeah, there really are enough to warrant their own dedicated video. Now first up, there are a whole bunch of unused graphics in this build that we've already mentioned in previous videos. We'll go through them pretty quick here, as you've probably already seen them, but I think they still deserve another mention.
Okay.
First, we got the early leaf background that was once used for the seed selection screen, as was also seen in a prototype build from July 2006 that was shown off at a game development presentation. There's an unused graphic of the propeller that we saw as part of the also unused propeller zombie. There's this early placeholder version of the sunflower, the screenshot that shows off the early version of the slot machine. There's also the caution bar and blammo graphics that were seen in earlier builds as a placeholder for the lawnmower mechanic. And then there's also a pair of unused coin graphics, the first of which is the early silver coin that would feature a brain instead of the dollar sign. Now, the second of these unused coins is an early version of the gold coin, where what looks like a sun design was seen on it instead of, once again, the dollar sign. I don't believe this coin is seen in any of the other versions we went over so far, used or unused, so pretty cool to find this left over here. And lastly for this section, in my previous video I went over several endless survival levels that were cut from the game but were still accessible via the secret limbo page menu. And although they are visible on this page in those builds, they all default to the same vase breaker graphic. Turns out, however, that these levels did also have dedicated thumbnail graphics for them that are found left over in this prototype build. So I guess the decision to scrap these might have been done before these graphics could even be implemented. Now, next up, I again mentioned this in my previous videos, but for those that didn't know, the developers of Plants vs. Zombies developed another game prior to it in 2001 called Insane Aquarium. And there are several references to and leftover graphics from this game, as I've covered in my previous videos, but there are also a few graphics left over from the deluxe version of Insane Aquarium in this build that aren't seen in any of the other versions of Plants vs. Zombies that I've covered so far. Anyways, these unused graphics include this notification window, some menu buttons, as well as similar looking blank dialogue buttons. There's graphics for a checked off as well as unchecked checkbox. And lastly, if you aren't sick of button graphics yet, there's also a few more in purple, blue, both normal as well as in a clicked state as we saw with the others. And finally, there's this yellow button also seen in a default as well as clicked on state. Alright friends, now moving on, we can finally check out some unused Plants vs. Zombies graphics that are unique to this build. Well, at least from all of the builds that we have public access to as I make this video. So first up, we got a pretty cool one, as there are several graphics for an animation of a purple explosion aptly and simply titled Nuke. Now, if you've ever played this game, you may remember that the Doom Shrooms, when used, explode in a, would you look at that, purple mushroom cloud. So yeah, this was likely designed to be the Doom Shrooms explosion before the more simplistic graphics were chosen and implemented. Next up, we got piles of rocks. Riveting, I know. Now, based on the fact that this graphic is as long as one of the lanes during gameplay, it's thought that these rocks would be placed over an entire lane and would probably prevent the planting of plants or shrooms. As such, it's been theorized that this may have been a gimmick used during some stages or minigames, or could have even been part of an early or alternate variant of the Zomboni, as the resulting ice from them also prevents the planting of any units for a while. And while on the topic of rocks, next we have graphics for this unused stone variant of the spikeweed. And here we can also see the stages of degradation that were scrapped for the spikeweed too. Now, based on their similar color scheme and both being related to hard, non-metallic mineral materials, it's believed that this might have been an early version of the spike rock upgrade to the spikeweeds. Now, next up are 3 gold variant upgrades of certain items, a golden phonograph, a bag of fertilizer, as well as shovel, with the shovel graphic notably appearing much less polished than the others. Based on how the golden watering can plant plants in a 3x3 grid compared to the base version single tile, it's theorized that all 3 of these unused golden items would work in a similar manner when upgraded. The gold shovel could have dug up plants in a 3x3 area to more quickly remove them, and then the gold phonograph and bag of fertilizer could have made plants happy and fertilized them respectively, also in that 3x3 grid to save time and likely money as well. Next up, we have this graphic, which appears to be a portion of the fog level. And of course, there's more to it than just that, as this appears to reveal an alternate, likely early version of it, as here the backyard pool's water is at a lower level, and the water's texture itself is also different compared to how it's seen in the versions used. Then next we have a pair of test graphics, the first of which is this test pattern featuring a whole bunch of intersecting lines as well as the large internal square being colored red. I'm not really sure what exactly this could be testing, but if any of you know, be sure to let us know down in the comments. Then secondly, and again in a square shape, we have test anim, which is seen as a red square outline with internally intersecting blue and green lines. Based on the name, this appears to have been used as a reference for boundaries as well as the horizontal and vertical center lines when animating objects for the game. Next, we have a blank seed upgrade interface that has text on it letting us know exactly what it is. And lastly here, we got this unused graphic of a skull, which based on its color scheme is believed to have been part of the menu graphics, specifically as part of the music and sound volume sliders.
Okay.
Now those are all of the more polished unused graphics that are left over in the game, but lastly for this video, I want to dedicate a whole section to the more crude early and unfinished progress bar. There's a micro and whole section to the more crude early and unfinished graphics left over unused in this prototype of Plants vs. Zombies. For starters, we have this really early and basic placeholder version of the background window for the section where you choose which seeds you want to use in a given level. This graphic and many which we'll take a look at going forward in this video appear in a very crude Microsoft Paint style like this. Like, next up, we got a whole bunch of early graphics for miscellaneous items and objects. These include early, but not as early as the ones we went over earlier, versions of the silver and gold coins, an early version of the diamond, early flags, as well as a small zombie head, probably for the progress bar. There's a larger zombie head, as well as horizontal and vertical arms, a pearl of some sort thought to be a cut currency item, and lastly, there's also this dead turnip. Rest in peace. If you've watched my previous videos, you may remember that turnips were one of the cut plant types that were planned to appear in this game, so I guess based on this graphic existing, they were at least somewhat implemented outside of just concept sketches before ultimately getting scrapped. And it wasn't until this game's sequel where the turnip finally got its debut as the tile turnip. Next up, we have a pair of unused graphics for Crazy Dave, as well as his Twitty Dinky's shop. For the shop, there's this really early and equally crude graphic of the hatchback to Dave's car appearing closed, and
also, I like Crazy Dave's idea. Also, I like it. The names they give to everything is stupidly funny. pvz1 literally made the one, literally the top, literally one of the best video game characters.
Have this unused graphic of Dave himself where a few differences can be seen. This graphic features different sprites used for Dave's mouth as well as his beard. The pot on his head is slightly different, his shirt is shaded a bit differently too, and although cut off, his ears appear much longer here in this graphic as if he was some sort of elf or something. Now if you thought this door graphic was crudely drawn, you ain't seen nothing yet, as allow me to introduce you to this door. Now that's what I call programmer art.
I know it! It's literally got to, that looks like Among Us and they did before me. Why does it now look like a car? Why does it now look like a car door? Do you see what I mean? Like the Among Us legs and then boom, we have a car door. It still looks like Among Us.
Based on its appearance, it looks like this door might have been drawn as a placeholder for the front door of the building that you defend in the game. Moving on, next up we got this brown tile simply titled Cobblestone, I suppose indicating what this was a placeholder of. Then we have two identical versions of this graphic titled Waveside and Wave Center respectively. In addition to what the names suggest, these appear to show something undulating, and there's really only one thing in the game that has waves like this, and that's the water in the backyard pool. So perhaps this graphic is associated with how the waves are formed in it. Next up, we got numerous early-looking graphics for some fallen leaves. Just based on the way these graphics are seen, it appears like they were meant to have been seen on the pathways in the game with an unknown effect. These graphics, coupled with the leaves seen on the early seed selection screen we went over earlier, make it seem possible that there might have been some more autumn or fall-related aspects in the game, such as maybe seasonal versions of each level or something. Then, all unused, we have an early graphic for the sun that you collect, where it's just seen as a more simple sphere. There are these early graphics for the Zombot's hands, this small speech bubble, as well as these early graphics for the portals, which are seen in the Portal Combat minigame. Next up, there are several unused cursors meant for the Zen Garden section of the game. In addition to early placeholder versions of the default and golden watering cans I mentioned earlier, these unused graphics also seemingly reveal bronze and silver upgrades to the can that were cut. Presumably, these would incrementally increase the watering area up to the 3x3 that the golden can offers. Additionally, there are also unused graphics for a standard pointing hand cursor, as well as this green reticle. You only really see a reticle once in this game, and that's when selecting a target for the cob cannon, so perhaps this was an early version of that. And on that note, there's also this unused graphic for the cob cannon's reticle found in the files as well, where it's seen more stretched out to give it more of a three-dimensional look. This doesn't really fit the angle of the paths seen in the game, so it makes sense why this was scrapped in favor of the one that is used.
Yeah.
Then circling back to the Zen Garden, there's also this set of unused graphics of some early artwork of some sprouts meant to be seen in the garden. And also for the garden, there's this unused black blob graphic that's actually supposed to be an early version of the shadows that are seen in the mushroom garden. Next up, we got early placeholder versions of both the lawnmower and pool cleaner, as well as some early graphics of seed packets where they are seen torn into 3 pieces. It's thought that these graphics might suggest that originally, new plants would be unlocked after collecting 3 pieces of their seed packet instead of just getting them right away after completing their respective stage. This is similar to how stages are completed and new species are unlocked in Insane Aquarium after the player buys 3 pieces of an egg. So yeah, this just adds more validity to this theory. Hope you're not tired of the unused graphics yet, as we got a whole bunch more to go. So next, we got several unused graphics for the zombies of the game. We got this sprite of a balloon that seems to be the same one from the early version of the balloon zombie, as well as a graphic of it popping. And then similarly, there's also this early version of the ladder zombie's ladder. Then next, there's also a whole bunch of sprites for many parts of the zombies, including their bodies, heads, as well as
Is that tongue? Okay, it looks weird.
arms for several zombie types, including the miner, pole vault, and more. When putting some of these sprites together, their animations can be created where we can see them walking, munching, as well as grimacing, presumably after eating some garlic, as is seen in the final version. Interestingly though, this sprite sheet also appears to have some old sprites for the zombies doing the Thriller dance as part of the Michael Jackson themed dancing zombie Easter egg that was scrapped from the game as we went over in my previous videos. And now, last up for this video, we went over the early unused graphics related to the zombies, but now it's time to move on to the plant side of things. First up here, there are several unused graphics showing off an earlier version of the Blover plant. We got its seed pack, idle stance, as well as its spinning and seemingly getting dizzy and stunned, resulting in its eyes spiraling out. I guess this might have been how the plant would expire on the field, which would have been pretty cool to see, at least more interesting than just disappearing as it does in its final form here. Next, there's also some graphics for an early version of the coffee bean, and in this animation it can be seen leafless and, more importantly, winged. I guess maybe they were going for some sort of vague Red Bull gives you wings caffeine relation here, and I guess a leaf just made a lot more sense than a coffee bean having wings for whatever reason. Now earlier we talked a bunch about the cob cannon's early aiming reticles, but there are also some early graphics for the cobs of corn too. First, there's this simple one, and if that ear of corn wasn't crude enough, there's also this set of sprites where we can see the cob going through its trajectory towards its target. Next up, we got an early thought bubble containing some Zeds meant for shroom-type units sleeping if placed during the daytime. There's this early graphic of a purple cloud that's believed to be a placeholder for the Fume Shroom's gas blast. And lastly, there's another sprite sheet, this time showing off a whole bunch of early or unused projectile types. So yeah, in addition to early versions of projectiles normally seen in the game, like the cabbages, stars, peas, and watermelons, there's also a few things that were ultimately cut from the game, like the iceberg lettuce variant, as well as the stinger bees that were an early version of the cactus unit. And furthermore, there are also a few unused projectile types here that we haven't even seen yet. A rock that would break open, as well as a cinched up black bag. Being found flanking the basketballs that the catapult zombies launches, it's theorized that these rocks and bags would have also been launched by the catapult zombies as well.
Yeah.
It's honestly pretty crazy how many early and unused graphics there are found left over in this prototype build of Plants vs. Zombies. I don't think I've ever dedicated a whole video to just unused graphics like this before. So yeah, it's awesome that this build was dumped to the public so we can get an awesome glimpse into an even earlier part of Plants vs. Zombies development. Anyways, that'll wrap up this series for the first Plants vs. Zombies on Lost Bits, at least for now. So many of you have been showing that you're very much interested in me covering these games by absolutely demolishing that like button, so yeah, keep crushing it and you can definitely expect more videos from this series on this channel in the future. Till then though, check out some of my other Lost Bits videos and make sure you're subscribed to find your way back here in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for stopping by today, and I will see you in a bit.
Okay, no, goodbye everyone.